Surviving the Applewhites, Chapter 18. Jake had finished gelling his hair. Now he turned his face one way and then the other so that the light above the mirror picked up the dusting of hair on his upper lip. Darken that down and he could pass for 17. Couldn't he? Not according to the red-haired kid who'd expected to get cast as Rolf and ended up playing an anonymous soldier instead.
It's ridiculous for you to play that part. No way an audience is going to believe you're old enough to get into the SS.
What the red-haired kid thought didn't matter. Jake reminded himself, or what anybody else in the show thought either, for that matter, about anything. Last night they'd had their first rehearsal, and Randolph had made that very clear at the beginning. The director, he had told the assembled cast, made the decisions, starting with casting. And anybody who didn't like those decisions could go to another show somewhere else for some other director. He had directed in theaters all over the country and had had a smash off-Broadway hit, and he intended to maintain a professional atmosphere at all times. I'm a professional, and I will expect every one of you to behave as if you are too. I don't put up with lateness, laziness, or sloppy work. You will not be called to every rehearsal, but when you are called, you will arrive on time and you will be prepared. When you are not actually on stage, you will be silent and respectful of the actors who are on stage. There is no place in a Randolph Applewhite production for amateurs who behave like amateurs. If he hadn't started that way, Jake thought, there might have been an open rebellion. There had been so much hostility in the air when they first came in that Winston had gone right underneath a folding chair in the corner and hadn't come out again until it was time to go home. Nobody except the leads had been happy with the casting. The people who'd expected to get the leads were playing unnamed townspeople or nuns or stormtroopers instead. There were so many people in the show that, except for the children, Randolph had had to cast almost everyone who had auditioned, but it hadn't made them happy.
I've been with the little theater since the building was in the Masonic Fellowship Hall,
he'd heard one man say, and I've never played anything but a major role.
Now he's brought in all these outsiders and given them the plum parts. It's a travesty.
There are no small parts, the woman he was talking to said. Only small.
Easy for you to say. You have lines.
Little Priscilla Montrose didn't even get cast, someone else said. The daughter of the president of the board.
And she actually looks the part.
After Randolph's speech about professionalism, people quit complaining, but the atmosphere hadn't really changed till rehearsal was over and he mentioned the possibility that a TV crew would tape some of their work for national television.
And why, you ask, do they wish to focus on the Treybridge Little Theater? Randolph asked. Because we are doing something different, something important, an edgy, innovative, truly American version of a classic of the musical theater.
Jake didn't know whether anyone bought that philosophy part, but the prospect of being on national television had settled them right down. Now Winston, who had been whining at the bathroom door, began to scratch to come in. Jake sighed. He opened the door, and Winston waddled in, his tail wagging furiously. "Hey, old guy, you don't care whether I look 13 or 17, do you?" he asked, rubbing Winston's ears. The dog's long tongue swiped across his hand, leaving a trail of saliva. Jake wiped it off on his pants. "Disgusting," he told the dog as he patted his head. "That's what you are, disgusting." An hour later, when the family gathered for breakfast at the main house, Lucille's guru joined them. Jake had seen him coming up toward the house from the cottage he was staying in and couldn't get over the idea that the man was a sort of human version of Winston. He was short and round, dressed in voluminous pants and a long tunic, and moved as he walked the way the dog did, almost as much from side to side as straight ahead. He had the same dark, solemn, almost mournful eyes. In Winston, these were contradicted by a perpetually wagging tail. In Govindaswamy, by a perpetually sunny smile. "I am having a cup of tea," he told them, beaming as he settled himself into the chair at the head of the table, "so as to join with you for a fellowship. I hope you will not be offended by my fast." Far from being offended, Jake thought, the family was thrilled not to have to share their breakfast. Jeremy Bernstein offered, as he stared at the single spoonful of scrambled eggs that was left in the bowl when it had been passed to him, to take the grocery list to Treybridge. Archie agreed to lend him his pickup. After breakfast, Jake slipped into the schoolroom, took an empty coffee can and printout he'd made from the internet, and hurried around to Lucille's vegetable garden. Lucille had come in that morning just as he and Winston emerged from the bathroom, complaining loudly that there were caterpillars all over her parsley, eating it down to the stems. She had asked them kindly to leave, and they hadn't gone, she said. That method had worked with slugs and earwigs and even aphids, but the caterpillars had refused to listen to her. She wouldn't use poison and didn't even like to pick them off because whatever caterpillars started eating, they had to go on eating or they'd starve. She consulted with the nature spirits, and they had had no advice except to relinquish her need for control. "So I guess we'll just have to leave the parsley to the caterpillars and do without. So much for the tabbouleh I was planning to make." "You can put parsley on the grocery list and get it from the store," Archie had suggested. "Oh, sure, covered with pesticides and probably genetically altered besides." Lucille's complaints had given Jake an idea. In the garden, he'd found exactly what he'd been hoping to find. As Lucille had said, the parsley was covered with green and black striped caterpillars that were busy eating all the leaves. Stem after stem had its caterpillar, some small and newly hatched, others fat and almost ready to pupate. He checked them against the photograph on the printout. Just as he'd thought, they were in the larval stage, one of the most beautiful of the Carolina butterflies, the black swallowtail. Black swallowtails had a particular preference for parsley, the printout had said. Carefully he picked the caterpillars off the parsley plants and put them in the coffee can. Then he picked the rest of the leaves off the parsley plants and put them in with the caterpillars. It wasn't enough to feed them for long. He would add parsley to the grocery list before Bernstein went to town. He hoped if he washed it carefully, the store parsley wouldn't hurt the caterpillars. Back in the schoolroom, he found an empty aquarium that would be just perfect for his plan. Today was Zedediah's day to be teacher on call. Unlike the rest of the family, Zedediah had a habit of actually showing up. He'd even demand to see what they'd been doing and ask them questions about it. Jake hated Zedediah's days. On his first one, the old man had asked Jake what gave him joy. Jake hadn't understood the question. "You mean, what do I like to do?" "I mean," Zedediah had said, "exactly what I said. What gives you joy?" Jake hadn't been able to come up with an answer. "Once you know that, you will know what you want from an education, and you'll be able to set your own program. Meantime, just do what Edie is doing." Every time Zedediah had been on the call since then, when he checked out whatever work Jake had done, he'd given him a look that seemed to say that Jake Simple was a screw-up who was never going to amount to anything. Edie, of course, never got such a look. At least he'd had something to show Zedediah this time. Not something Edie had thought up. He put the caterpillars and the parsley into the aquarium and added a couple of sticks propped against the glass and held in place with lumps of modeling clay. Then he tied a piece of cheesecloth over the top of the aquarium to keep the caterpillars in, and lettered a sign that said, "Metamorphosis, a living demonstration." He taped the sign to the front of the aquarium. This would be an infinitely better teaching opportunity than a papier-mâché caterpillar and chrysalis. Destiny, and all the rest of the family for that matter, would get to watch the caterpillars pupate and then turn into butterflies. The internet website that had had the photo of the black swallowtail caterpillar had advised keeping butterflies inside once they'd emerged from their pupa state rather than releasing them. That way they could be cared for and guarded all the way through the life cycle. More butterflies could be safely raised indoors that way and eventually released to increase their numbers in the wild. Butterflies were in trouble, it said, from pesticides and habitat loss. Raising them for release could help. The website gave a recipe for feeding the butterflies once they hatched. They would get to know you and come land on your hand to feed, it said. You could offer the concoction made of soy sauce, Gatorade, and milk, and they would unroll their long straw like tongues and suck it up. The mixture sounded disgusting, but the website promised that the butterflies would love it. You could also make a plain sugar syrup or just put a piece of ripe melon where they ought to be able to get to it, and they would feed themselves. He draped newspapers over at the aquarium so Edie and Zedediah wouldn't see the minute they came in, and then he sat down at his desk with a book about the Civil War Edie had given him. When Edie came in and began gathering what she had done during the week to show Zedediah, Jake began humming the title song from The Sound of Music. Before she had had a chance to react, Zedediah arrived with Destiny, who was loudly yodeling the song about the lonely goat herd. As usual, he was slightly off key. Zedediah, Edie said, make him stop. That's enough now, Zedediah said to Destiny.
What's a goat herd?
Destiny asked. A boy who takes the goats up to the pastures in the mountains to feed and watches out for them, protects them.
Why is he lonely?
You'd be lonely too if your only friends were goats, Edie said as she held out her curriculum notebook to Zedediah. I've checked off everything I've finished. My report on the Battle of Gettysburg is all done, just haven't had a chance to print it out yet. Jeremy's been on the computer a lot. We must let him know that you need your time on it too. Maybe Hal can let him use his sometimes. Zedediah looked over Edie's notebook. Good, good. I see you've started reading A Midsummer Night's Dream. He turned to Jake. Haven't you begun to read it yet? Jake shook his head. I'm reading Hamlet instead because of Cordelia's ballet. He could tell by the look on her face that Edie hadn't read Hamlet yet. Good. He'd actually been ahead of her on something. How far have you gotten in it? Not that far. It's slow going. I've been taking it with me to rehearsals, but it's hard to concentrate there. I hope you aren't going to let your role in The Sound of Music interfere with your schoolwork. We have an obligation to your grandfather to be sure you do a little learning while you're here, you know. Zedediah was giving him that look again. Was he warning Jake that the show could get snatched away from him like a cigarette or his headphones? We only have rehearsals at night, Jake said. I can read it during the day. Good. I finished the butterfly project, though, Jake said. You can't have, Edie protested. It was already done. Jake went to the aquarium and whisked away the newspapers. This is a different way, a better way to do the teaching opportunity. Destiny can see the whole process of metamorphosis in real life. Edie stared into the aquarium. What are those? She looked more carefully. Black swallowtails? Jake nodded, humming The Lonely Goat Herd quietly to himself.
Are those warm thingies gonna get to be butterflies? Destiny asked.
Jake nodded again.
And do I get to see them grow their wings?
Absolutely.
Yay, Jake!
Jake smiled at Edie, who glowered back at him. Score 1 for the delinquent kid.